I thought it was going to be the perfect Saturday. The sun was shining just right, the water in my pool glimmering like a private tropical lagoon, and my inflatable unicorn float was perfectly positioned for maximum laziness. I had a cold lemonade in one hand, a waterproof speaker playing some classic rock in the background, and absolutely zero intention of leaving my backyard today. That's when I first noticed him, HOA Karen's son, striding up the driveway like he owned the place. He wasn't running, but there was this self-important swagger, the kind of walk people practice in front of mirrors, thinking it makes them look like an authority figure. Spoiler, it doesn't. He stopped at the edge of my pool, clipboard in hand, sunglasses reflecting the water like some cheap action movie stunt double. "Hey, you can't be swimming here," he said, as if that sentence alone had the power to drain the pool, teleport me somewhere else, and enforce a rule I'd never agreed to. I blinked at him, blinked again. Maybe my brain was buffering, then I realized he was dead serious. "Excuse me," I asked, trying to keep my voice calm but letting a little amusement creep in. After all, how often do you get confronted in your own backyard by a teenager armed with clipboards and misplaced confidence? "HOA rules, you're breaking them by being in the pool. I'm going to have to report this to my mom," he said, tapping his clipboard for emphasis. I swear, the sound of that tap made my eye twitch. I smiled, not that it made him feel any better. "Report away," I said. "I'm sure she'll appreciate your diligence." But he didn't back down, his chest puffed up like a rooster ready to crow over a pond he didn't own. "This is serious," he said. "If she finds out, there will be fines. You might have to." And that's when I cut him off. Not in an aggressive way, just enough to make him pause. "Little does your mother know," I said, leaning back in my unicorn float with perfect calm. "I'm not just some guy in a pool with a ridiculous floaty. I'm the sheriff." His eyes widened, but he quickly masked it with a forced smirk. He probably thought I was bluffing. Kids do that when they're trying to seem brave. I let him stew for a moment, enjoying the way his confidence wavered ever so slightly. "Sheriff, huh," he said, trying to regain composure. "Well, that doesn't matter. HOA rules." I raised a hand, floating lazily toward him, as if gravity itself were my ally. "Buddy," I said, my tone gentle but firm, "this is my backyard. This is my pool. And as much as I admire your commitment to HOA paperwork, rules don't trump property rights or common sense." I could see the first cracks in his armor. His mouth opened, then closed. He shuffled his feet, realizing that maybe, just maybe, he had bitten off more than he could chew. Behind him, I could hear faint whispers and camera phones clicking as a few neighbors peeked from behind curtains and fences. Perfect audience. And then, the real fun began. From somewhere across the yard came a voice I'd grown far too familiar with over the years, HOA Karen herself. Loud, commanding, and completely certain that her moral high ground was taller than any building in the county. "What's going on over there?" she yelled, her voice cutting through the summer air like a siren. I glanced up, letting a little smirk play on my lips. Karen's son stammered, I told him about the rules." "That's cute," I muttered under my breath, floating like I was the calm center of a storm he couldn't possibly comprehend. The tension in the air thickened instantly. Something about HOA Karen approaching with that exact brand of righteous fury made it clear that this was not going to be a simple, walk-away kind of confrontation. The stakes were rising, and the summer day I had planned was quickly turning into a showdown of wills, rules, and egos. And just like that, what should have been a lazy Saturday by the pool had transformed into the start of what I could already tell would be one of the most absurd, stressful, and ridiculously entertaining conflicts I'd ever faced. Little did HOA Karen, or her overconfident son, know that I wasn't just someone to argue with. I was the sheriff, and they were about to learn the hard way that some rules don't apply when the law is on your side. And that's when I realized, this is going to get really interesting. I had barely finished floating my unicorn back to the center of the pool when I heard it, the flustered, high-pitched voice of HOA Karen's son, trying to sound authoritative but failing spectacularly. I'm calling the HOA office right now," he stammered, fumbling for his phone as if dialing it might somehow give him actual power over me. I let him fumble. Honestly, it was kind of mesmerizing. The way his fingers danced over the screen, like he was trying to hack into NASA instead of sending a simple text. I leaned back, sipping my lemonade, letting the sun warm my face, all the while enjoying the chaos unfolding before me. "Go ahead," I said casually. "I'm sure they'll love hearing about me floating in my pool, really groundbreaking stuff." He froze. Did I see the tiniest flicker of doubt in his eyes? Maybe. But he squared his shoulders, raising that clipboard like it was a shield against reality. "If my mom finds out about this, there will be fines. You'll have to." "Fines?" I interrupted, letting my tone drip with sarcastic curiosity. Oh, I didn't realize HOA fines had the power to drain municipal pools, suspend sheriffs, or float unicorns off into the stratosphere. How terrifying. He glared at me, muttering something under his breath. I caught a few words. "Won't get away, cute, very cute." I could almost hear the adrenaline pumping through him. Then it happened, my first taste of real tension. From somewhere across the fence, I could hear the distinct sound of footsteps pounding on the grass. Not her, yet, but she was coming. HOA Karen. The looming storm herself. I glanced at her son and saw his confidence start to crumble. For once, he wasn't the one standing tall. "I think your mom might want to know exactly what you're up to," I said, leaning lazily on the edge of my unicorn. "After all, she's the one who thinks clipboard tapping is a form of martial art." He froze again. His fingers hovered over the phone. He was about to make a call, probably expecting backup, but something in his demeanor screamed hesitation. Good. Hesitation is the first step toward panic. I decided to push a little further, just to see how far this rabbit hole went. "You know," I said, keeping my voice calm but letting the humor edge into sarcasm, "most people just swim in the pool without writing a 5-page report first. But hey, you're special, truly heroic." He opened his mouth, closed it, then opened it again. Clearly, he had no idea how to handle the combination of calm authority and quiet amusement. That's when the whispers started, neighbors leaning out of their windows, recording this spectacle with their phones. I caught a glimpse of Mrs. across the street, covering her mouth to hide a laugh, while Mr. was clearly giving a thumbs up from behind his fence. The stakes weren't just in the backyard anymore. They were watching, silently rooting for me. And then the voice came, sharp, commanding, full of that trademark, "I am the law of this neighborhood" energy. What is happening here? I rolled my eyes and let out a sigh that probably sounded like I'd been personally affronted by the universe. HOA Karen had arrived. And as predicted, her son went from confident clipboard wielder to a deer frozen in headlights. Karen stormed up to the fence, her heels clicking like tiny gavel strikes. She gestured wildly at me, her face red, veins visible in her forehead. "This is unacceptable. You cannot just ignore HOA rules like this. Do you have any idea how many people?" I let her words wash over me. Honestly, I was enjoying the drama. But inside, my mind was already racing, thinking 2 steps ahead. This wasn't just a teenager overestimating his authority anymore. This was Karen herself, the self-proclaimed queen of community rules, marching right into my backyard to try and assert power over someone who literally has a badge. I floated a little closer to the edge of the pool, letting her see that I wasn't intimidated. "Ma'am," I said, tone calm, measured, but with just enough steel to slice through her lecture. "I respect rules, I respect community, but I also respect property law, and my backyard is exactly that, mine." Her eyes narrowed. "You think your little sheriff badge, that gives you the right to." And that's when the tension peaked. Every neighbor peeking from their window, every camera phone silently recording, every tree casting shadows across the yard, it all felt like the calm before a storm. Her son was shaking now, realizing he had bitten off far more than he could chew. Karen, meanwhile, was packing like a predator, sizing me up. I leaned back in my unicorn float, taking a slow sip of lemonade, letting the silence stretch just long enough for the suspense to sink in. This isn't over, I thought, not by a long shot. And just like that, my lazy Saturday had transformed into a full-blown standoff. A standoff that promised escalation, absurdity, and if I'm honest, entertainment I wasn't about to let go to waste. Little did Karen or her son know, the real showdown was just beginning. The moment had come. HOA Karen was packing along the edge of my backyard like she owned the planet, and her son was hovering nervously behind her, clutching his clipboard as if it were a life raft. I floated lazily in my pool, letting the sunlight sparkle off the water, pretending I was completely at ease. But inside, I was calculating every possible angle, every move in this escalating chess game. Karen pointed a finger at me, shaking it like she was delivering a verdict from on high. You cannot just ignore the rules. The HOA has regulations for a reason. I let her words hang in the air, savoring them for a moment. Then I leaned back on my unicorn float, one arm dangling in the water. You know, I said, keeping my tone casual but measured, most people just swim and enjoy their property. Rules are great, but they're meaningless if you're breaking the law, accidentally or intentionally. Her eyebrows shot up. Excuse me. I decided it was time to let her, and everyone watching, know the truth. I'm not just some guy floating in a pool, I said, my voice calm, yet firm. I'm the sheriff of this county. Her son's jaw literally dropped. He stumbled backward, almost tripping over his own feet. Wait, what? He stammered. His confident, pompous demeanor was gone, replaced by sheer panic. Karen froze mid-gesture, the very picture of disbelief. You what? She managed, her voice trembling with a mixture of anger and shock. Sheriff, here, you mean I. I let her fumble, let her twist her words and struggle to form a coherent sentence. There's nothing quite like watching someone realize that their entire world of control is just a fantasy. I floated closer to the edge of the pool, my eyes locked on hers, calm but unyielding. That's right, I said, letting the words sink in. This is my property, my pool. And while I appreciate your enthusiasm for HOA enforcement, there are limits. Legal limits. Her son's clipboard hand started shaking. I could see the sweat glistening on his forehead, and his voice cracked as he muttered, But my mom, she's the HOA president. And, I asked, smiling faintly, does that make her law? Because I think she's forgetting one thing, the sheriff enforces the law. Karen's face turned a deeper shade of red than I thought was possible for human skin. She opened her mouth, probably to launch another threat, but the words caught in her throat. For once, she didn't have the commanding edge she usually wielded like a sword. Instead, she looked human, vulnerable, frustrated. And that, my friends, is a rare sight indeed. The tension in the backyard was palpable. The neighbors who had been quietly watching through blinds and windows were now leaning in, their cameras raised, capturing every priceless moment. Mrs. Next Door was biting her lip to keep from laughing outright, and Mr. gave a discreet thumbs up from behind his fence. Every whisper, every click of a camera phone made the standoff feel like a scene from a movie. I decided to drive the point home, adding just enough humor to cut through the tension but not diminish it. Look, I get it, I said, letting my words float across the water. You have rules. You have authority. You think clipboards and fines make you invincible. But sometimes, reality has a way of reminding people that there's a difference between being in charge of a neighborhood and actually enforcing the law. Karen's son shrank back, muttering under his breath, and I could tell he was mentally calculating every escape route imaginable. Meanwhile, Karen's hand was hovering over her mouth, a classic, I can't believe this is happening pose. Then came the quietest, most dangerous part of the moment, the calm before the storm. Karen's eyes narrowed, her posture stiffened, and her son glanced nervously at the street, probably hoping anyone would intervene. But there was no one. It was just her, him, and me, and I had the upper hand. I floated a little closer to the edge, letting the water ripple around me, and leaned on the pool's edge. Let me make this simple, I said. You can either step back, or we can have a very public discussion about property rights, HOA limits, and how the law actually works. Karen's son gulped audibly. Karen's face was a mixture of rage, shock, and disbelief. The neighbors were all silently watching, and in that moment, the backyard wasn't just a backyard anymore. It was a battlefield, and I had just revealed my trump card. And that's when I realized the real showdown, the one that would decide who had authority here, was about to begin. Because Karen was not the type to back down easily, and her son had already proven he wouldn't give up without a fight. The stakes were higher now, and this lazy Saturday, it was officially over. The moment HOA Karen realized I wasn't going to panic, the entire dynamic shifted. She took a step closer to the pool, her heels clicking against the concrete like tiny, judgmental gavel strikes. Her eyes were wide, her lips pressed tight, and the sheer intensity of her glare made it feel like she was trying to bore a hole through my forehead. "Excuse me," she barked, her voice echoing across the backyard. "I am the HOA president. You cannot just flaunt the rules like this." I floated lazily on my unicorn, letting the water gently rock me back and forth, enjoying the dramatic flair of her entrance. "Oh, I didn't realize the HOA had the power to suspend sheriffs now," I said, keeping my tone light but firm. "I must have missed that part in the bylaws." Her nostrils flared. "Bylaws, regulations, fines, community standards, you have no idea what you're doing." I let her rant. Honestly, watching her go was a little like watching a reality TV show unfold in real life. The absurdity of someone treating pool etiquette like a national security threat was almost artistic. But beneath the humor, the tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. Every neighbor who had been watching peeked a little further out from behind curtains and fences, cameras pointed, waiting to capture the showdown. Karen's son hovered behind her like a nervous shadow, still clutching his clipboard as if it might magically make me obey. He muttered something under his breath, probably calculating the legal equivalent of a get-out-of-jail-free card. Too bad for him, he was way out of his league. I decided to step up the pressure, floating closer to the edge with a slow, deliberate grace. "Ma'am," I said, keeping my voice calm but carrying enough authority to slice through her lecture, "I respect your position, I respect community, but I also respect the law, and as it happens, I enforce the law." Her jaw practically hit the ground. You're the sheriff," she stammered, as if the words alone were some kind of cruel joke. "I am," I replied, letting the calm confidence in my voice do the work. "And you've just walked into my jurisdiction literally. This is my property, my pool, and my rules apply here." She sputtered, waving her hands in every direction. "You can't just, this is unacceptable. The HOA will take action, you'll be fined, you'll—" "Fined?" I interrupted, floating slightly closer, letting the ripple of the water carry an almost theatrical weight. "Are we talking HOA fines or actual legal fines? Because one of those is entirely meaningless, and the other, well, I'm standing right here." Her son swallowed hard. His earlier bravado had evaporated like mist over my pool. I could practically see him calculating the odds of surviving this encounter without humiliation. Not great, by the way. Karen, of course, wasn't about to back down yet. She started packing along the edge, pointing at me, gesturing wildly as if motion alone could make me obey. "You think a badge lets you ignore community standards? That's not how." "Actually," I said, cutting her off, "that is exactly how it works. And I'd appreciate it if you'd step back before someone gets wet, or worse, embarrassed." The neighbors couldn't contain themselves anymore. Mrs. across the street stifled a laugh, clearly enjoying the absurd spectacle. Mr. gave a barely perceptible nod of approval from behind his fence, a silent cheer for the underdog winning against the tyrant. Karen's son tried again, his voice cracking as he stammered, "But Mom, the rules." "Son," I said gently, like speaking to a lost puppy, "rules are only as powerful as the authority behind them. Right now, the authority behind those rules is standing in this pool, floating on a unicorn, and quite frankly, not impressed." Karen's face turned a deeper shade of crimson, and her packing grew frantic. She gestured at her son again, as if willing him to conjure some magical enforcement squad out of thin air. But he just shook his head, clearly realizing the gravity of the situation. And that's when the silence fell. The kind of silence that makes your chest tighten because everyone knows the next words could escalate or end the confrontation. Karen stopped packing, her eyes narrowed. She took a deep breath, and I could feel that tiny shift in the air, the calm before the storm. The stage was set. Every neighbor watching, every camera pointed, every ounce of tension hanging in the air, it all boiled down to this. Would Karen escalate further, or would she finally understand that her rules had limits? And in that instant, I realized the real showdown was just getting started. Because Karen wasn't the type to back down easily, and I wasn't the type to let a clipboard-wielding teenager and his overbearing mother dictate what I did in my own backyard. The next move was going to be explosive. By now, the entire backyard had transformed into a battlefield of wills. HOA Karen was packing like a general preparing for battle, her son hovering behind her like a nervous lieutenant, and I was floating in my pool, a unicorn under me, lemonade in hand, calmly observing the absurdity of it all. Listen, I said, keeping my voice calm but firm, this isn't a negotiation. You may have rules, I may have neighbors taking notes, but the fact remains. This is my property, my pool, and my authority applies here. Karen's eyes narrowed to slits. You think a badge gives you the right to ignore the HOA? I don't think, I replied evenly, I know. Her son whimpered something about fines and reporting to the HOA office, but I could see the panic rising in his eyes. It was the kind of panic only kids experience when their world collapses faster than they can Google the law. Karen's lips pressed into a thin line. You can't just, this is community, people obey the rules for a reason. And I respect that, I said, floating closer to the edge, letting the water ripple around me like the calm in the eye of a storm. But respecting rules doesn't mean ignoring reality. HOA rules do not trump property rights. And as sheriff, enforcing the law comes first. Her jaw dropped. For a split second, I saw her process the realization. This wasn't going to be a passive disagreement she could lecture her way out of. I could almost hear the gears in her mind turning, trying to formulate some strategy to regain control, but she had underestimated the situation. Underestimated me. I let a slow smile spread across my face, not in arrogance, but in that quiet, confident way that lets people know they're on thin ice. Look, I said, letting the humor in my tone contrast the tension, I get it. You have your community standards, your little checklist of offenses and infractions. But let's be honest here, your checklist doesn't scare me, and it certainly doesn't make your son qualified to enforce them against a sheriff. Karen's son shifted uneasily, glancing at her for backup, only to be met with a glare that probably said, I told you to handle this. The kid's clipboard shook slightly in his hands, and I could see him realizing that all his careful planning had gone out the window the moment I revealed my identity. Karen, meanwhile, wasn't about to give up. She leaned over the fence, no, more like lunged, her voice rising with the intensity of a hurricane. This is unacceptable, you're flaunting the rules. People will hear about this, fines, sanctions, the community will. I cut her off gently, letting the calm in my voice contrast the storm of her rage. Ma'am, I'm sure you'll find plenty of people to lecture. But here, in my pool, you've picked the wrong weekend to do it. This is my domain, my authority, and my rules apply. Her son's face turned pale. He opened his mouth to argue again, but I could see the hesitation. He wasn't sure if he should call for backup, run to the HOA, or just disappear. It was the kind of hesitation that builds suspense for anyone watching, and I knew the neighbors across the street were loving every second of it. I floated closer to the edge, my gaze locking with Karen's. Step back, I said, firm but not threatening, before someone gets embarrassed, or worse, wets their perfectly pressed outfit. Her face went beet red. Step back, she hissed, you can't. I just did, I interrupted, floating in place, every ounce of my calm confidence radiating. Step back, Karen, for your sake, for your son's, and for the sanity of anyone watching this unfold." The backyard was silent for a moment. You could practically hear the tension humming in the air. Every neighbor leaning out their window, every camera phone poised, every shadow in the yard. It was like watching a showdown in a western, except the villain wore heels and carried a clipboard. And in that moment, I realized I had fully asserted my authority. The standoff had reached a point of no return. Karen could scream, rant, and threaten fines, but the law and my property were on my side. The next move was hers, and I knew whatever she did next would determine if this backyard confrontation became legendary or completely disastrous for her. Little did she know, I was ready for whatever she tried. Just when I thought the standoff couldn't get any more ridiculous, HOA Karen pulled out her next move. With a sharp huff, she turned to her son and barked, "Call the HOA office. Now, tell them what's happening." He scrambled, fumbling for his phone, thumbs flying over the screen like it was a bomb that might go off any second. The tension in the air was electric. Neighbors leaning out of their windows, cameras poised, every one of them sensing the absurd showdown was about to escalate. I floated closer to the edge of the pool, resting my arms on the unicorn float. "You know," I said casually, "I admire your dedication to protocol. Really. But let's remember something. No amount of paperwork is going to change the fact that this is my property." Karen's son stammered, "But the HOA, they can." "They can try," I said, raising an eyebrow, "but they can't enforce anything that violates the law. And guess what? I enforce the law." The panic on his face was palpable. I could practically see his brain short-circuiting as he realized that calling the HOA wasn't going to magically summon authority over a sheriff. I fought back a smile, because while the situation was tense, the ridiculousness of it all was too entertaining to ignore. Karen, meanwhile, was packing along the fence line like a caged lioness. This is outrageous. I will not tolerate this disrespect. You will be fined, you'll face sanctions." "Sanctions," I said lightly, letting the word roll off my tongue like a bell tolling in a ghost town. "You mean those imaginary punishments that exist on paper but can't touch me here? Sounds terrifying." Her son swallowed hard, muttering, "We have neighbors, people will see." "People are already seeing," I said, glancing toward the second-story windows of the neighboring houses. "And judging. I suggest you start thinking carefully about how this looks for you." I could see Karen's eyes flicker toward the street, probably realizing that her performance was being watched by an audience she couldn't control. The very idea of social accountability seemed to rattle her more than any threat I could make. But she wasn't done, not by a long shot. "You think flaunting the rules in front of the entire neighborhood makes you heroic. You're making a scene, this is." "Entertaining," I offered with a grin. "I know, right? It's like a reality show, except I didn't audition and the prize isn't $1 million. It's your dignity, or lack thereof." Her son winced, realizing he'd just lost the battle of composure. Meanwhile, Karen's expression twisted from fury into disbelief. The calm, confident tone I was using, and the fact that I wasn't budging in my pool, was slowly, methodically dismantling her strategy. I floated a little closer to the edge, letting my gaze sweep over both of them. "Let me make this simple," I said. "You can continue threatening fines and making phone calls, or you can step back and accept reality. The choice is yours." Karen's face went beet red, and I could see her fingers clenching the fence. Her son looked like he was about to crawl under it, disappear, or beg for mercy, probably all three at once. Then came the moment of suspense that made the entire scene feel like a climax in a movie. Karen opened her mouth to unleash another threat, paused, and glared at me like she was trying to summon some invisible HOA army. The neighbors held their breath, some with phones raised, others leaning so far out their windows I feared someone might topple over. "Step back, Karen," I said again, calm but firm, letting the words hang in the thick summer air. "I'm giving you one chance before this becomes memorable." Her son's knees shook, and I could see him realizing he had no plan B. Karen, on the other hand, seemed frozen, caught between pride, rage, and sheer panic. Every second that ticked by added to the suspense, and I could feel the tension rippling across the neighborhood like an invisible electric current. And in that moment, I knew something important. The longer she hesitated, the higher the stakes became, not just for her, but for everyone watching. This confrontation wasn't just about a pool anymore. It was about authority, ego, and the audacity of thinking that a clipboard could ever outweigh a badge. I floated back, taking a slow sip of lemonade, letting the silence stretch for a heartbeat longer than comfortable. The next move, whatever it was, would decide the outcome. And one thing was certain, the backyard battle had officially reached the edge of chaos. By this point, the backyard felt less like a peaceful Saturday retreat and more like a battlefield. HOA Karen was practically vibrating with rage. Her son was hiding behind her like a scared little shadow, and I was still floating in my pool, enjoying the calm before the storm and the absurdity of it all. Karen's eyes narrowed, her fists clenched, and every muscle in her body screamed, "I am authority incarnate." I could see the neighbors from across the street leaning out of windows, phones raised, knowing that this standoff had reached legendary levels of tension. Every second felt like it stretched on forever, the kind of moment where one wrong word or one sarcastic sip of lemonade could explode everything. "You think this badge of yours gives you the right to ignore the HOA?" Karen shrieked, stepping closer, heels clicking against the concrete like a metronome of menace. I leaned slightly on the edge of my unicorn float, letting the water ripple around me. Calm, measured, and absolutely unflappable. "I'm not ignoring the HOA, Karen. I'm obeying the law. And in this backyard, right now, the law is on my side." Her son whimpered behind her, muttering, "Mom, maybe we should." I said, letting my voice slice through the tension like a scalpel, "Let the professionals handle it." Karen's face went beet red. She opened her mouth, shut it, then opened it again, clearly unsure if screaming louder would change reality. I could almost hear the gears in her mind spinning. Threats, fines, community shamming, none of it worked against a sheriff who knew every loophole in HOA law and every inch of their bluffing tactics. The suspense was unbearable. I could feel the air thickening, like the entire neighborhood was holding its breath. Mrs. had one hand over her mouth, eyes wide, trying to stifle laughter. Mr. across the street was leaning so far out his window I worried he might topple. And somewhere, hidden behind a bush, I could hear the soft click of a phone recording this epic confrontation. Karen took a deep, shuddering breath. I don't understand. How can you just ignore the rules?" "I'm not ignoring anything," I replied calmly. "I'm enforcing reality. And here's reality. This is my property, my pool, my backyard. And yes, my rules apply, not yours, not the HOA, mine." Her son's knees buckled slightly. I could see the internal panic, the dawning realization that the clipboard in his hand might as well have been a piece of paper with the alphabet on it. Totally useless against me. Karen's fists trembled, and she took a step closer. The suspense in the air was almost suffocating. Every neighbor, every camera, every shadow in the yard was silently cheering, or at least waiting to see who would blink first. I decided it was time to close the standoff. I leaned over the edge of my pool slightly, giving her a look that was calm but carried enough weight to let her know the game was over. "Step back, Karen," I said slowly, deliberately. "For your sake, for your son's sake, and for the sake of anyone watching this unravel in public humiliation." Her eyes narrowed, a spark of defiance burning, but even that spark was flickering. The tension was thick enough to cut with a knife, every second a drumbeat toward resolution. Finally, with an audible huff, Karen stepped back. Her son sagged in relief behind her. I leaned back, letting the water cradle me like a reward for patience and restraint. The neighbors exhaled collectively, some laughing quietly, some shaking their heads at the absurdity they had just witnessed. I floated there for a moment, letting the adrenaline ebb. The backyard had gone from idyllic sanctuary to full-blown, and somehow, I'd won without a single angry word, or a single splash of water beyond what the pool naturally allowed. Karen's retreat was slow and deliberate, every step a mixture of rage, shock, and embarrassment. Her son followed meekly, clipboard dangling uselessly in his hand. The entire spectacle left a sense of awe hanging in the air, like watching a storm pass over a tiny town and leave everyone wondering how they survived it intact. And as I sank back into my unicorn float, letting the water ripple gently around me, I allowed myself a private, victorious thought. Sometimes, the simplest way to win is to stay calm, know your rights, and let reality do the talking. The backyard was quiet again. The tension had dissipated, leaving only the faint whispers of neighbors and the distant sound of a lawn sprinkler somewhere down the street. I took another sip of lemonade, savoring the moment, and realized something important. This victory wasn't just about a pool, or HOA rules, or a clipboard-wielding teenager. It was about asserting boundaries, standing your ground, and doing it with just enough calm and humor to make even the fiercest opponents reconsider their life choices. And while Karen might return, plotting her next move, for now my backyard and my unicorn float remained safely, absolutely mine. Little did anyone know, this wasn't the last time HOA Karen would test the limits, but for today, the sheriff had won. The sun was beginning to dip toward the horizon, casting long golden streaks across my backyard. The pool sparkled, the unicorn float gently bobbed with the movement of the water, and for the first time in what felt like hours, I could breathe. HOA Karen and her son had retreated down the driveway, their heels and sneakers echoing on the concrete like a retreating army. I leaned back in my float, sipping the last of my lemonade, a small grin tugging at my lips. The standoff was over for now. My backyard, my pool, and my personal sanity were safe. The neighbors were still peeking out their windows, some still filming, others shaking their heads in disbelief. I waved faintly, silently acknowledging their support. It felt almost like winning an election, a small victory, but everyone had watched it unfold in real time. Karen's son had learned a lesson in humility, I hoped. Maybe he would tell his friends that, yes, HOA rules are important, but enforcing them against a sheriff, that's ambition bordering on foolishness. And Karen, well, she had learned that rage, spreadsheets, and clipboards could only get you so far when reality and the law stepped in. I floated there, thinking back over the confrontation, chuckling to myself. It was surreal, really. A lazy Saturday, a pool, and a unicorn float turning into a for authority, rules, and pride. If someone had told me this morning that I'd be negotiating with the HOA president while calmly bobbing in my pool, I would have laughed. And yet, here I was, victorious, soaking wet, and oddly exhilarated. The quiet of the evening started to settle in. The neighbors, satisfied with the spectacle, slowly retreated indoors, probably sharing whispered gossip and phone videos with anyone willing to listen. I imagined the conversations. Did you see her face? Or he's the sheriff? In his backyard. It was the kind of legendary tale that would be told for months, maybe even years. I reflected on what had made the victory possible. It wasn't brute force or yelling louder than Karen. It was patience, calm confidence, and knowing my rights. It was about letting her make her own mistakes while I stayed in control. Humor had helped too. A well-timed comment can disarm even the most overbearing HOA president. And let's be honest, floating on a unicorn never hurt anyone's authority either. Then, as if the universe had one last touch of irony to deliver, Karen's voice called faintly from the distance. "This isn't over." I couldn't help but snort. "Oh, I'm sure it isn't," I muttered to myself, swirling the lemonade in my hand. But for today, for this glorious Saturday, it was over. I leaned back, letting the water cradle me. The sun dipped lower, painting the sky with shades of pink and orange, and I realized something important. Life is full of battles. Some are small, some are ridiculous, and some involve teenagers with clipboards and overzealous HOA presidents. But the key is knowing which battles are worth fighting, and how to fight them with your head held high, humor intact, and authority respected. The evening was quiet now, save for the gentle hum of sprinklers and the faint chirping of crickets. I floated there, savoring the moment, imagining the stories my neighbors would tell. Did you see the sheriff take on HOA Karen, right in his backyard in his pool? Incredible. I knew this wouldn't be the last time Karen tested the waters. She thrives on confrontation, and her son had already seen the thrill of playing enforcer. But I was ready. Calm, confident, and slightly amused, I realized that no matter what came next, I had the upper hand. And sometimes, knowing you can win without losing your cool, that's victory enough. Finally, I leaned back fully, letting the sun warm my face, the water gently rocking the unicorn float beneath me. A small, satisfied smile played across my lips. Saturday, once intended for relaxation, had turned into impatience, humor, and standing your ground. And as I sipped the last drop of my lemonade, I whispered to no one in particular, "Enjoy your rules, Karen. But remember, the sheriff is always watching, and sometimes he floats." With that, the backyard was mine again, peaceful, calm, and victorious. Until next time. Every HOA has a story on HOA Headaches. You'll hear the ones they tried to bury. Subscribe today.